Oh, we're not? We're here with Father Apostolos Hill of Holy Trinity Church in the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Phoenix, Arizona. And Father Apostolos is coming to us live, or is it really him? We don't know if he's really human. He's here to talk to us about. He's here to talk to us about transhumanism. Father, would you like to kind of give us an introduction to this subject for those of us that aren't familiar with it?
I would, but first I'd like to find out why we selected it and who it was selected by and what that person or persons was or were thinking. So it's a good topic. I'm scanning the room for cyborgs right now. I'm not seeing any.
Kyle, where are you? Kyle, he's asking you a question. This is the cyborg who asked the question. So, why this question interested you?
What is your designation?
I think I'm 100% human as far as I know.
As far as you know.
Yeah.
That's good.
What interested me is paralleling, I think, secular mainstream desires and I guess the orthodox theosis. So transhumanism and theosis, kind of paralleling them. And I don't know. I'd like to see what you have to say. So that's why.
Good. All right. All right. Well, I've done a few things over the last few months and years about technology, and I guess I would say about myself that technology is something that interests me, if only because of the impact that it has on humanity. So I've done a few retreats. In fact, I did one with our youth group at the cathedral last fall where I actually showed up in Star Trek garb. It's pretty cool. So we talked about technology a lot there. And so I've kind of looked at this in terms of what's coming because, of course, young people today really kind of feel that they're on top of the pile when it comes to understanding technology. But technology is changing so rapidly that it's pretty hard to stay on top of. So in investigating again this idea of transhumanity, which was not the first time that I'd heard this, by the way. It comes by many different sort of names. Did quite a bit of reviewing of some materials that I put together. How many of you watched the video? Father Allen sent a video. Did you see that? Did you look at it? Yeah, part of it.
People.
All right, that's good. So anyway, so here's a trivia question: who is the current president of the Transhumanist Society?
Ray Kurzweil.
Who?
Ray Kurzweil. Is it Kurzweil? Is it Ray Kurzweil?
Ray Kurzweil? Kurzweil?
Kurzweil. He's self-promotion.
I think that's correct. There's a fellow that's running for president, actually on a transhumanist party platform.
Wow.
His name is Zoltran. Zoltran Istvar is the guy running for transhumanist president. I want that on a bumper sticker. That'd be even better than Cheney and Voldemort, I think. So this has been around for a while, and in fact, if you read any of the documentation or if you did any research, the first fellow that sort of talked about transhumanism was Julian Huxley, which takes you all the way back to the 1930s. And Julian Huxley is an interesting fellow because he is also featured in a book that I've got in my library by a Jesuit priest called Stanley Jackie, and the name of the book is The Purpose of It All. And Julian Huxley was interviewed. He has the distinction of being the head of UNESCO way back in the 1930s. And he was interviewed back in his day about why it was that so many people like him and Hollywood elites and people like that were so quickly adopting Darwinism. Because, you know, in our era, we sort of take it, you know, that Charles Darwin's writings have been broadly accepted for a long time, but that's certainly not the case. And Julian Huxley was asked, why is Darwinism so fascinating to you? And the reason that he gave was really interesting. He said, he said that he wanted to be freed from any sort of Victorian social mores, in particular sexual social mores. So he's a known figure in these kind of circles. Let me give you some of the high points from this video if you didn't get a chance to listen to it at length. These are some quotes from the video, and these all occur within about the first half hour of the video. So the first thing that was said very early on is technology is about to take over the torch of history and will guide us to a new era, right? Technology will guide us to a new era. So one of the first things I want to pull aside is the notion of logical positivism. So in other words, this statement really speaks to us about the personification of technology. And logical positivism is a philosophical school of thought that holds to the notion that all technology is its own unqualified good, that it is self-authenticating. So that came out right away. The second one is this one. It says, again in this film, that is technology, will lead us inexorably to a transhuman age, an age when more evolved species will leave mankind behind as a fossil in history. At which point, I'm imagining Patrick Stewart as Dr. Charles Xavier in the X-Men series, kind of saying similar sorts of things. So again, this is not also a new idea, but again, technology will lead us inexorably to a transhuman age, an age when more evolved species will leave mankind behind as a fossil in history. And the next person, the girl that kept talking on the first part of that, says, like it or not, we are becoming cyborgs. So, trivia question, in what country has a commercial firm already offered implanted ID chips to expedite the process of getting into secured areas on their campus? Have you heard the story?
Anybody know? Germany?
Nope.
Switzerland.
Nope.
USA.
Sweden. In Sweden. So, and they load up not just your ID, but also if you're allowed a certain number of clicks on the copy machine, it'll keep track of that. If you want to pay for your lunch in the cafeteria that way, it'll take care of that. So, in a very real sense, sort of cyborg sort of technologies are already with us. And whereas in the past they've been strictly necessary, in other words, artificial limbs and artificial organs and things like that to keep us alive, now they're getting sort of into boutique, sort of voluntary things. So that was another statement on there. The next statement I heard was really kind of telling. It's a little bit further on. A fellow said, "We really do want to violate human limits, and we are getting closer and closer to doing it. We really do want to violate human limits, and we're getting closer and closer to doing it." And the next thing that I heard came right on the heels of this is, we are now becoming objects of conscious design. Now listen to that. Listen to the inherent, really Darwinism in that statement. We are now becoming objects of conscious design. So whenever I'm dealing with science, sort of so-called, and I love science. I'm a big fan of data, big fan of, an objective look at what is. I'm not frightened of science, and as Orthodox, we've never really had a corollary for burning scientists or, that sort of adversarial posture that the Western Christian world has had. But if you look at the statement, it's very, very clear. We are only now, you can put the word only, and only now becoming objects of conscious design. So again, whenever we're dealing with science, there is always a point of view. There's a logical fallacy that's in place in the minds of a lot of people that somehow science is pristine, that science is free from any sort of philosophical, emotional, essentially human point of view, that it exists, as it were, in a type of an intellectual vacuum. And that is simply not the case, as we've seen. And so these biases these presuppositions will definitely come out, and they are coming out in this film. Now, obviously, this is one film of many, and there's a lot of other research, a lot of other data out there about transhumanism. But the makers of this film and the scientists that they interviewed very definitely had a point of view. The next one was, we are going to remake ourselves. We are going to remake ourselves. And we are at the end of a definition of what a normal human being is. Right? So these fellows let the cat out of the bag very quickly in terms of what the transhumanism movement is about. I'm curious with the rest of you, if you had other statements that you heard, or could even paraphrase things that you heard that were astonishing to you, or that got your attention. Anyone?
Elon Musk recently said that.
Stand up and come over here.
Okay. Over here. Okay.
Where you see yourself on camera.
Okay. Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, recently said that that we should be careful introducing AI into society, because it would be like releasing the demon. He said that.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I do want a Tesla car. I would love to have a Tesla car. That would be really cool. So that's on my wish list, is to get the Tesla coupe. That would be great. But you're right that the idea of artificial intelligence and achieving the singularity. Have you heard about this sort of the technological singularity? Essentially, when AI takes over and machines become self-replicating.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've heard of that? Yeah, obviously, that's a real meme.
Father, didn't they make another movie about that?
Well, they did. It was a really bad movie. It was, who was in it? It was, I watched it, and thankfully I watched it like a secondhand show, because it didn't pay full price for the ticket. Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp was in it. Did you see the movie?
Transcendence?
What was it called? Yes, Transcendence. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And, you know, it's kind of funny, too, because as I was listening to this transhumanism sort of presentation, it reminded me a lot, again, of Patrick Stewart as a Captain Jean-Luc Picard, you know, wearing spandex on the Enterprise, saying things like, we evolved and we drink tea or Earl Grey hot, and we listen to classical music, and we don't need, you know, money and things like that. So there is quite a bit of hubris in these kind of presentations, which seems to be the case that Hollywood does not share. Because if you wanted to Google right now just a list of dystopic movies, even in the last 5 years, I mean, it comprises a fairly substantial minority of all the movies that Hollywood is releasing. And of course, you know, all of you in LA, you probably know people that can tell you how difficult it is to bring a movie idea to the silver screen. It takes a lot of financing and business acumen and such, and yet there seems to be, you know, no end to these types of movies. So clearly, there's some skepticism in society about this grand new age that we're going to unleash. Or at least there's the idea that we're going to have to go through this very convulsive sort of period of darkness to get to this, again, grand new age of, you know, transhumanism. So, do we need to go any further into what these guys have to say? Have I beat this horse to death enough, or I can move on?
Father, he wants to go on.
Father, would you mind
Yes.
just quickly defining transhumanism as you're using it here, just for?
I will be happy to define transhumanism for you. Transhumanism is an international culture. This is off the Wikipedia site, by the way, using technology, and it's actually a pretty good article with no one really questioning the data that's put in here. But it also correlates across a lot of different sort of articles and sites. And there's actually a picture of Julian Huxley here, who's a biologist who coined the term. So transhumanism is an international cultural and intellectual movement with the eventual goal of fundamentally transforming the human condition, and I would say the human person, by developing and making widely available technologies that will greatly enhance intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. Right? So it's the idea of tinkering with what it means to be a human person. Transhumanist thinkers study the potential benefits and dangers of emerging technologies, but I will say that I really don't think that they spend much time talking about the dangers of emerging technologies. The president of Tesla is quite unique in decrying the unleashing of the beast, of the demon of artificial intelligence, because again, when the philosophical construct beneath this is logical positivism, and it is, then the technology, again, is always self-authenticating. The fact that it exists is its own best argument for its broad application, right? So, but they are thinkers that study the benefits of technologies that could overcome fundamental human limitations, as well as the ethics and developing and using such technologies. Again, I'm going to sound the cautionary tone at that point, because what one finds wholly lacking in these circles is any sort of ethical consideration. Again, you know, utilitarianism, logical positivism, Darwinism, you know, and also coupled with atheism, which is very much, you know, on display in the film, really. This is completely devoid of any sort of ethical consideration other than utility. So whenever I hear any sort of ethical pushback in these circles, I understand that what they mean is that it hasn't achieved a certain sort of utilitarian threshold, if you will, to argue for its sort of broad application. So again, in broad sweeps, this is something that's been around for a while. And the idea is to simply transcend the limitations of the human person. Now, on a more immediate sense, we've been doing that for a while, right? I mean, athletes use performance-enhancing drugs. Hollywood starlets will get all sorts of plastic surgeries and things like that. I mean, you know, we have artificial hearts and artificial organs. So in a very real sense, you know, this isn't a new concept. But the... Hello?
Yeah, we're still here.
You're still there? Okay, I can't see you now. That's fine. But the dividing line, though, is that, you know, whereas, you know, we accept a, you know, an artificial heart or a heart valve or whatever else, some piece of medical technology to prolong life, or an artificial limb for veterans returning from foreign wars, you know, having been horribly injured. Now we're talking, and especially this one gal in this film, talking about the fact that she says the body is an extension of fashion. Right. So transhumanism is really talking about remaking what it means to be a human person. Great. So did that answer the question?
Yes, thanks, Father.
So, Father,
okay,
kind of related to that, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about here lately in addressing issues that that society has for us is questions or ideas that begin with a wrong premise, and oftentimes we end up kind of you know, running in circles, you know, trying to answer these kind of questions when it's maybe more important for us to kind of back up a little bit and ask whether the premise that they're beginning with is actually a true premise. And can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a point that I make quite a lot in catechism lectures and things that I do. You're right, because I mean, where does one begin? We cannot allow, really, as practicing Orthodox Christians who approach salvation, even utilizing the language of our Holy Fathers as the science of salvation, by which they mean the following: that there is a repeatable, definable process, a soteriological process that will achieve the end of sanctification. It's been tried and true over, you know, 2 millennia. So we really approach these things very differently, and we cannot allow ourselves to be drawn into a conversation where these underlying premises are not, first of all, identified. Because even if we find ourselves using very similar vocabularies, the meanings behind those words are going to be radically different. Father Allen and I understand it's coming into Orthodoxy from a heterodox background, you know, where you can really drive yourself crazy talking to some of our old associates about Orthodoxy, because even when we say things like Jesus, we have very different understandings and very different depths of understandings about that. And so this is really a problem for us when it comes to engaging these conversations. Engage them we must, but we really have to not allow ourselves to accept the sort of the world, if you will, to frame any of these debates on their terms. Now, I would warrant that those of you having already gone through college have experienced this firsthand. Because I know our own kids, having gone through school or graduate school, or now they're in postgraduate studies or whatever, have had their own sort of battles to fight in the university because, frankly, our worldview is not one that is broadly embraced and affirmed. So that is very true. We cannot allow ourselves to just sort of blithely be swept up into a conversation if we don't understand who it is we're really talking to. And again, in this particular conversation, the presuppositions and the biases that are there, the way that the debate is framed is that logical positivism is the philosophical school of thought that drives this, right? Darwinism and social Darwinism, that is the idea that we are not beholden to any sort of creator God, that we are not, designed by anything greater than just sort of chance, sort of random evolutionary forces. Utilitarianism is a big one. I mean, and we could go on and on about the intersection of utilitarianism and public policy, right? Because it's what we see is that, that which advances the greatest good to the greatest number of people, despite the damage done to the minority, right? So that's and atheism is one. So there really is. So what we're looking at here with transhumanism is the logical, upshot of the confluence of these and other movements and worldviews that are completely divorced from any possibility of the divine, right? This is what you're looking at here is what deification and theosis looks like without God. That's what this is. So the best we can do is hope for is a 7 to 9, on Star Trek Voyager or something. This is the best that it gets. So at which point, I always find myself going back into first things. And over the years, in catechetical lectures, I find...
Can you go back and explain what you mean by the words theosis, deification? I'm sure not everybody's familiar with those terms.
Sure. So when I was a boy and when Father Allen was a boy and we were going to church, and you probably can relate some of this, salvation, all right, the idea of being saved, if you will, had to do primarily with just not acting out, right? And I take great joy whenever I can talk to young people of disabusing them of the notion that salvation in an Orthodox world is about behavior. Salvation for us is not essentially about behavior. There are plenty of rascals that we venerate as saints, plenty of people who stole paradise. The thief on the cross next to Christ had not done one good thing in his entire life, and yet he was baptized in his own blood and opened the gates of paradise to everyone else. So we really don't look at salvation the way that the Western world does. And for us, it's not about modifying your behavior. Salvation for us, and this is one of the saints of the church, St. Gregory Nazianzen, said the following: that is saved which is united to God. Right? That is saved which is united to God. So if you think about this, Orthodoxy and the Orthodox Church really are the proto-transhumanists. And I'm going to make a point about that at the very end of this evening. We are the very first transhumanists because we understand very clearly that the human organism, if left to itself, is going to dissolve and to desiccate and return, as one of our saints said, back to the abyss of non-being, right? And one of the cute things that I see is whenever unillumined folk talk about really serious, eternal, and existential concepts, it really is like looking at a toddler playing with a slide rule. They're just not equipped. And forgive me if that sounds arrogant, but the things that we're talking about here really can only be revealed to us by God. So, yeah, for us, theosis, divinization, is part of a continuum in salvation, which begins with catharsis, which begins with expelling the poison of sin out of us, admitting that we have it, admitting that it's deadly, admitting that it's got to go, right? And then from catharsis, we move on to ascesis, which is the struggle, the arena, the fight. You know, the Lord said, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force, right? And then from there, you get to theosis. Now, these are not strictly sequential. These are happening simultaneously in us at all times, right? But for us, as Orthodox, we understand that salvation is a return to God. It is being reunited to God, right? So when we talk about theosis and salvation, that's what we mean. And by the way, that is an upward movement that will never end. We have a bizarre idea about heaven somehow, that heaven is this static place. You're all done. You're as good as you're going to get, right? Like the bride and groom on their wedding day. You're as handsome and as beautiful as you're ever going to be, right? No. No. We understand that in heaven, since salvation is about being united to God, and God is eternal, God is inexhaustible, and all those incredible words that we use about him in our liturgy, that there is no end of our upward growth throughout all the vast reaches of timelessness. We will always be growing. So again, when I say that we are the proto-transhumanist, I mean that quite sincerely. And we have very many beautiful examples of what that means. And I can regale you, and I will a little bit later, with stories about what real transhumans have done, including stopping time, including covering vast distances, and doing some pretty amazing things that there's no technology that could account for. So, you with me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So let's go to the beginning. Yep. Go ahead.
Somebody has a question. Hang on.
All right.
Oh, actually, we have a line of people waiting the question.
Fire away.
Father, I think you've already explained this, but it's still, maybe you can explain it maybe in a different way based on how I'm going to ask the question. Okay. What is the ultimate goal for, like, the person, the scientist who is pushing transhumanism? What is their ultimate goal if they succeed in what they do, they're going to dissolve themselves in a way? Because like you quoted somebody to say that basically it's going to be the elimination of the human race, and like, you know, this transhuman kind of whatever being is going to become the new evolution or whatever. So why would a scientist want to dissolve himself in transhumanism? What is the ultimate goal of transhumanism? You might have answered.
No, I think the question. I think the answer really is transcendence via technology. You know, the idea of transcending yourself, moving beyond your own limitations, and since, you know, these folks and others like them really have shut off any possibility of this transcendence happening on a spiritual plane, which is, say, an eternal plane. They're left with trying to achieve that ultimate goal of transcendence through technology. And you know, honestly, I got to tell you that one of the real drivers behind, you know, our current fascination with, I heard it described this way this week, pelvic autonomy, which is to say our completely unbridled sort of sexual lives, is nothing less than a mostly failed attempt at transcendence. There's something in us that realizes that what we see around us cannot be all there is. So we're constantly striving and reaching for the beyond, but not knowing what that looks like. And so for this particular group, they believe that the idea of transcendence, you know, of nirvana, whatever you want to call it, there's any number of different ways, of heaven, can be achieved technologically. So.
Just as a background, I used to. Sorry, it's very confusing.
Just look.
I know, it's okay. Sorry. I'll look over there. I'm looking at you now. So.
Back in middle school, I'd say a lot of transhumanist concepts scared me, and I especially like the idea of my personal identity and self being non-consensually dissolved into some sort of collectivity. That idea, that notion of some of the conspiracy theories I read, that someone might put nanomachines in the air that would go in my brain, and then there'd be a switch that turned on one day, and we'd all be a hive mind. I wouldn't have any say in it. That initially scared me a lot in middle school, but later on in high school, as I began to philosophically explore different things, I came to question my philosophical notions of identity and what constituted identity, not just for people and persons and humans, but identity in a much more broad metaphysical context. And what I came to was the realization that a lot of my definitions of identity weren't things that I could hold up to philosophically, and weren't things that I could empirically and from both a sort of phenomenology standpoint of just me as an isolated person trying to figure things out independent of sort of scientific inferred knowledge, but also through science I wasn't able to reconcile some of the early thought experiments that I remember taking a philosophy course that my philosophy professor proposed to me. One of them being having my brain be altered one cell at a time, and the question of change. Am I still the same person in the presence of time and change? And rather than going for a whole long thing on that, I want to ask you if you're familiar with the orthogonal argument and the issue of orthogonality in artificial intelligence.
I don't believe so. Why don't you fill me in?
The orthogonal argument and the orthogonal issue is whether or not you can talk about certain forms of intelligence being achievable without other forms of intelligence being implicit in getting to that point. So in a lot of Hollywood movies, when you see an AI become self-aware and it goes homicidal and decides to shut down a facility, and then the big buff stars have to go deal with it and blow up the computer. In a lot of those movies, it's assumed that the artificial intelligence is incapable of understanding many things. It is capable of reaching that point of deciding that it no longer needs humans. But it's assumed that it's also not capable of appreciating other human things, like what is the ultimate teleology or the ultimate consequence of it doing something like wiping out humans. And those AIs who go out homicidal and kill people, they're smart enough to do that, which is a very hard, complicated thing to do, some of the plans that these machines come up with, but they're not intelligent enough to appreciate art or appreciate culture or appreciate many other things that humans are able to appreciate for a number of reasons. And so I just want to know if you were familiar with the orthogonal argument, and if identity were not a thing that were metaphysically absolute, then what would your answer be for? I don't know. I didn't make a very good question. I'm sorry.
Well, I think I've got it. I mean, identity issues are a real problem. I mean, for us, so much of what we talk about in terms of identity is really nothing more than sort of ego emanations. We are a very egoic society, very much so. I always sort of decry the use of the word individual, because for us as Orthodox, even the very term individual, which of course you'll hear on virtually every newscast, is a term that just has no ontological content for us at all. It's a completely empty and vacuous term. So you mentioned identity on a number of different planes, and again, in a Christian context, in an Orthodox context, we would maintain that true identity can only be revealed in community. So for instance, there's an old Latin phrase that says, even where you have one Christian, you have no Christian, right? And so we have ontological categories for the married, we have ontological categories for sort of the monastic state, but we don't have an ontological category or a way of affirming the rightness of sort of that hyper individual sort of state, because we really feel that we are only known in community, with the community of the church, community of the family, or however that plays out. So that's another thing. I'm sure.
You're using a word over and over again that I don't think a lot of people here understand. The word ontological. Can you?
Ontology is the study Yeah, ontology is a study of being itself. It's the study of what it means to subsist, what it means to exist.
How we get our being.
Yeah, what is the root of our being? So when we say then that a word like individual is a word devoid of any ontological sort of meaning, what we mean by that is it's not an adequate container for carrying forth the idea even of identity, right? It's hollow. So again, there's another thing that you mentioned in the question, and that is, that these artificial intelligences sort of achieve sentience, and they begin making their own decisions, and then they're going to basically turn around and start turning everything into gray matter, by flooding with nanites. We're all going to get torn down into our composite sort of DNA structures or whatever. And again, I guess the thing that I have about that is the idea, that these things can exist in some sort of an ethical vacuum. So there's, again, without getting too deep into it, this is a great question. You're much smarter than me, so I can really understand everything you said. But I do think that a lot of these biases really come out in the way that these things are portrayed on the silver screen.
So, Father, you talked about individualism and the use of that word that's so much a part of our culture, and the way one thing that I think that we need to kind of redefine as well, in terms of what this particular movement, how they define themselves, is our understanding of what humanity is. What is the definition of humanity? And I think again, these are things that begin with entirely different premises.
Yep.
And you talked about, us being defined in our humanity in a way by us being in community.
Yep.
The personhood. How do we define what it means to be human, and how does that differ from the way this particular movement defines what it means to be human?
I think the ultimate point of reference for us in terms of community is the community of the Holy Trinity. Because God is a triune God and exists, as it were, in his own community of persons, that becomes then for us the archetype of what our communities must be like. And our communities must also be communities that reflect and that include the divine. And I would say this comes to us again from the very, very beginning, from, let us make man in our image. So, in the very beginning of the Bible, there's this very clear allusion to a Trinitarian activity. Let us make man in our image. So the idea is including humanity already in that community of the Godhead, right? And then you go forward in the second chapter of Genesis, and then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul, right? It didn't say that he became an animated mind. It didn't say that he became a sentient body. It said that man became a living soul. And so the primacy of being, the root of our being, from a Judeo-Christian understanding, has always been that soulish aspect, right? That internal part of us. And speaking to the previous question, that's why, for instance, Data on Star Trek could understand the mathematics of classical music, and he could understand the composition and use of color, in fine art. He could not appreciate either of them as art. There are certain levels of understanding, very important levels of understanding, that really can only exist in us on the plane of the soul. Like, why do we find some person attractive and another person unattractive? And you hear all sorts of crazy things. Well, you have sympathetic electrocardial rhythms, and you get together in the magnetic kind of fields. And you hear all this kind of crazy stuff. No, I just think she's pretty. Don't ask me why. So this whole world is open to us. It really can only be open to us on the plane of the soul, on the plane of the spiritual. I see another question lurking there.
Father,
Father Allen has been talking about, has mentioned multiple times, this problem of misguided premises or the wrong questions being asked. And I wanted to ask if you could comment on sort of the historical, the idea of progress that might be a wrong premise behind a lot of transhumanists, or the transhumanism that, not the orthodox transhumanism that you articulated, but the transhumanism that sort of comes from the logical positivism that you were talking about, and maybe this idea of transhumanism as the end, sort of the pinnacle of progress over the ages. If you could maybe comment on this idea of progress, and maybe the whole idea of progress being sort of a misguided premise towards, if you can.
Yeah, no, I will try. Progress obviously is a very loaded term, right? I mean, so across various points of the political spectrum, progress would mean something very, very different. You know, according to different sort of economic theories, progress would mean something very different. So to say that one is progressive depends entirely on context. So you know, you can't get to point A, you know, from point B unless you know where both of them are. And so when you talk about progress, the idea is progress from what and progress to what. Right. And so again, a lot of the languages that we hear, a lot of the vocabularies that we hear assume a very great deal. Now, that having been said, as an Orthodox people, we do understand that the human person is absolutely not static, right? You are not the same person today that you were yesterday, nor will you be the same person that you are today, tomorrow. We are constantly changing. We're constantly being sort of affected by, impacted by experiences. You could go out tonight and get your heart broke, you know, you could go out and you could be injured somehow, or you could go out and become inspired. So we understand that we are constantly moving. And one of, I say, that sort of the Orthodox Christian sort of understandings of transhumanism is transcending that very static view of what it means to be a Christian person, what it means to be a human person. Because for us, the ultimate human person is the God-man, Jesus Christ. And as Greeks, we even had to create new words for him. So we actually call him O Theanthropos, Theos Anthropos, the God-man, right? And so our very precise theology about the person of Jesus Christ that we will be celebrating the day after tomorrow in the Feast of the Ascension is that God, fully united, everything that it means to be a human person with everything that it means to be God in his one divine person, without admixture, without mutation, without change. The completeness, the ontological wholeness of our humanity being completely affirmed, so that Jesus was a real human man, but also at the same time, because he is God, the completeness of the Godhead. You know, in Christ, all the Godhead dwells in bodily form, as St. Paul wrote, are completely present. And so then for us, understanding then that salvation is about being united to him, we understand that there are and can be no limit to the progress that we can make, but only in him. Only in him. Let me tell you a story. This is all getting pretty boring. I'm losing you. Let me tell you a story about a transhumanist. Saint Porphyrios was the ultimate transhumanist. He died in, I think it's 1995 or 7, I remember. Elder Porphyrios, now Saint, was living in a little apartment in Athens. And he was a spiritual father for a particular Gerondissa, an abbess, who was traveling from the southern part of Greece through Athens, so from the Peloponnesos, I believe it was, through Athens, back up to her monastery in the northern part of Greece. I think she may have been in Ormilia. So anyway, they're going through Athens, and she feels duty-bound to stop in and get a blessing from her Geronda, from her abbot, her spiritual father. So they stop in his apartment, and he welcomes them. Oh, so glad you're here. Come in, please come in. And the abbess had said before this, had said, we're just going to go in, we're going to get his blessing, all right? Don't sit down, we got to go, we got miles to go before we sleep. Okay. So he goes in, he's, sit down, take your time, here's some water, here's some glika, here's something to eat, and oh, by the way, when you leave, this young man has been visiting here, can you take him back to his apartment in the opposite direction of where you're going? And Yodoni starts losing her mind, like, what? Fine, we'll take him. So, fighting Athens traffic, if you've never driven in Athens, you're in for a treat. It's great. I once had to cut a guy off on the sidewalk because he tried to jump the sidewalk to pass me with a van full of kids. So I had to cut him off on the sidewalk. It was great. So in Athens traffic, takes the guy back to his apartment, drives all the way to the north of Greece, pulls into the monastery, and looks in the chapel that all the lights are on the chapel. And she's thinking, well, there's no vigil tonight. What are the sisters doing up? She can't believe it. So she gets out of the bus and she marches into the chapel, and she says, "Why are you still up? You should be in bed. We've got prayers in the morning." And they look at her like kind of funny, and they say to her, "Yoronisa, we're just now finishing Vespers. We haven't even had dinner yet." Which means that through the prayers of St. Porphyrios, no time left on that journey. They arrived at the monastery at the same time that they left his apartment. This is documented by everyone that was there. And I could keep you up all night with similar stories. So progress towards a defined goal for us as Christians is progress towards the divine. And the Lord himself said this. He said, "The works that I do, greater works than these will you do because I go to the Father." Right? So for us, progress is always progress towards God. And as we progress towards God, we progress towards each other. As we progress towards each other, we progress towards God, which is also, by the way, our understanding of what it means to be married. It's progress towards the other and to God.
Okay, we're ready for a couple of more of those stories.
There are more stories. Well, I can tell them to you. But let me back up a little bit because there's a lot I want to talk about in Genesis real quick. In Genesis 4, the Lord has a conversation with Cain before he slays Abel. So, again, to me, it's really cute that you look at these sort of transhumanists, and God bless them, and I mean that most sincerely. They have a very optimistic view of life, but within the second human generation, we have fratricide appearing, and so Cain is moping, and Cain is upset because God has not accepted his offering, and he's instead accepted Abel's. So the Lord speaks to Cain and says the following in Genesis 4. He says, "Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and all its desire is for you, but you must master it." And in these two little verses really is announced to us the arena of the struggle that we are in. And this has become for us a very inconvenient today. And this is something else we need to flesh out in terms of presuppositions and biases and these types of arguments. And that is that sin isn't really sin, right? And that spiritual death isn't really spiritual death. I mean, I can tell you, talk about identity and personhood and ontological sort of integrity, that one of the things that's always astonished me as a pastor is just how horrifically damaged a young psyche can become as a very young person. The damage that can be wrought in a young person through sin committed against that person is really staggering, is really quite astonishing. So we really need to be very clear as an Orthodox people that there really is a way that leads, there's a path of progress that leads to life, and there is a path of degress that leads to spiritual death. And there's a particular Greek word that I like using, because we use commandments, we use laws, we use statutes, words like that, but that's not what the Greek says at all. In Greek, the word that we use interchangeably for commandment or statute or law or precept is dikeomata in the plural, dikeomata. So, so we would sing Evlogito sikirie didaxon meta dikeomata su. Blessed are you, O Lord, teach me your statutes, your commandments. And what dikeomata really means is this is the right way. This is the way that we know that will produce the right outcome. This is the way that leads to a good result. It's a very practical way of looking at that. But once we accept that, we have to accept that the antithesis of dikeomata is that which produces a very bad result. And if you want to read historically what a very bad result looks like, go back and read the first chapter of Romans tonight. And you can see just how far sideways an entire empire can get very quickly if we forget that progress must be made along the trajectory of that which leads to God. So, is there another question?
Father, I have a question. Father, question for you. Somebody was, one of my friends said about wrong premises. Recently I heard a theory, basically what we're talking about today, transhumanism, and then you said Darwinism, and you know, before Darwinism was rationalism, and I heard a couple of theories that the trouble started 200 years ago in France by, you know, even with the rationalism, and but so I heard a theory that that you have to track the problem back to the time of Renaissance. So these we're talking about the Western society and the development in the Western society that was influenced by the Western Church. What do you think? What was the, since you mentioned how an entire empire can go wrong way, what is the trouble, or what is the wrong premise from the beginning if we can track it back to the Renaissance? What happened then in the western part of Europe where Catholic Church was active before Reformation, before everything? What do you feel that was bad thing that happened to them? Because East had a different way. We are now part of the same culture, but it actually, we're talking about the Western world.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a great question, and yeah, there's plenty of contemporary Orthodox writers that will speak about that, about the Renaissance movement, about the Age of Enlightenment, and what the Age of Enlightenment really connotes in the Western sort of Christian context is the idea of sort of bringing science out from under sort of the supervision of the church. Now, from an Eastern perspective, we never really had. It's difficult to say. I mean, it wasn't under the supervision of the church in the East because it wasn't necessary for it to be so. Because for a whole host of reasons, I guess, but there just wasn't that same sort of adversarial posture between science and the church. So there's no Eastern sort of corollary to, you know, executing Galileo or something like that, right? But especially after the French Revolution and the rise of the sort of Enlightenment age, especially in the person of René Descartes, there's this idea that the created order, the world around us, is not something that really reflects the majesty of God or of a creator God. It's not something that we hold to be sacred or something over which we are asked to be stewards. But it really is just sort of the raw material. So, you know, whereas before you would, you know, enjoy sort of looking at and examining a butterfly that sort of lands on your hand and looking at it and watching it fly and observing its characteristics. The Cartesian view of that would be to catch the thing and pin it down to a, you know, a bit of wax in a deal and sort of examine it, you know, once you've killed it. So there is a very different animating principle behind sort of post, you know, Enlightenment rationalism and an Eastern Christian worldview. And in fact, there's a very particular phrase that we use about that worldview. We call it the phronima, the worldview, phronima ecclesiastikon, the worldview of the church. So for us, we really do look at everything through the lens of being, again, united to God. So to go a little deeper, we understand on the basis of what St. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, all of creation groans together until now, until awaiting the adoption of sons, And so we look in, John 3:16 in the Greek, "Outos God agapis en theos ton kosmon," for God so loved the cosmos that he gave his only begotten son. And so, we really understand that salvation is not something only for human persons, but that salvation is itself a cosmic event, right? I, John, saw a new heaven and a new earth descending out of the heavens, for the old was no more, right? So again, for us then, salvation is something that is not only concerning unity. So let me tell you another story. You want to know the story? It's a great story. St. Paisios on the Holy Mountain. St. Paisios is on Mount Athos at a time near the end of his life when there is just a tremendous drought. You're all in California, you know about drought. Just an extreme drought. And I actually have a photograph of this event in a book that I've got. Gripping the island. They can't grow anything. And so there's a fellow that wants to go and visit St. Paisios in his cell, his little cave, and travels up the trail and turns the corner, and there's little Paisios, now St. Paisios, standing out in front of his cell next to these towering tomato plants. I mean, they're much taller than he is. Of course, he was a little man. So these tomato plants, 6 feet tall, and hanging off of these tomato plants are these tomatoes the size of like cantaloupe. I mean, they're enormous. And so the guy walks up to now St. Paisios and says, "You gotta know, what are these?" He said, "These are my tomatoes." And then he says, "Could you imagine how big they'd be if I watered them?" So the idea of sanctification in an Orthodox construct includes everything around us. That initial rupture, that initial chasm into which the darkness of the underworld sort of streams in, is healed, and it is sealed, and the world around us is itself repaired through the sanctity of one human person, right? If you want to see the antithesis of that, you can go back to the first Lord of the Rings movie, where the ring wraith is looking down the embankment, and the hobbits are there beneath it, kind of hiding, and he puts his mailed hands on the ground, and as he does so, all of the bugs and stuff in the ground start trying to leap out of the ground to get away from him, right? I mean, that's really a beautiful picture about the difference between the way that leads to life and the way that leads to death. So another very personal story, when the Deepwater Horizon well blew up out in the Gulf of Mexico, it happened just a few weeks before I was planning to go down to Florida. And I was so outraged, I was so insulted by the fact that we, for the sake of profit, that we, for the sake of worshiping the demon, that is to say, that ancient demonic principality who has been known by the name of Mammon for time immemorial, would so befoul such a beautiful thing as the Gulf of Mexico. So here's little me. What am I going to do? Well, our flight is very late getting in. We don't get to Clearwater Beach until after midnight. But the first thing I do is I go down with my little vial of holy water. I mean, it was like, it was like this big, my little vial of holy water. And I go down to the water, and I do the prayer of the Agismo, and I pour it in. Why? Is my little bit of water going to change anything? No. But at least to put down the marker that what had happened here is wrong. So we really do look at, our place in the cosmos as being exactly that. Our place in the cosmos. But for us, it is a cosmology that also includes the divine. So moving ahead a little bit, and then we'll get back to your question. On Thursday of this week, we're going to celebrate a great feast of the church, the Feast of the Ascension. And I'd be very curious to hear from you if you can perhaps anticipate why is it that the Feast of the Ascension is so absolutely critical to what we're discussing tonight? Because it is. The Feast of the Ascension is absolutely critical to this conversation. Why do you think that is?
I mean, because it's basically talking about Christ being both God and man, and basically ascending past mere humanity. You know, he already was more than human. And we're talking about transhumanism, which is basically trying to be more than human technologically. And that's being more than human. This is being more than human by being connected to God, as opposed to by being connected to technology.
Are you able to hear him,
Right.
Father?
I am. No, and he's spot on. Let me read you Ephesians 2, verse 4, about the ascension. But God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he's loved us, even when we were dead in our transgressions, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you've been saved. Verse 6, and raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. So in the Ascension, we celebrate not just the fact that, you know, good for Jesus. He's a good guy. Glad he got to go home. That's awesome. What we're talking about in the Ascension is the fact that God, in the person of Jesus Christ, still robed in our humanity, right? Still wearing our flesh, now glorified in his resurrected body, brings our humanity into the heavens and sits enthroned at the right hand of the Majesty on high. There is no human transcendence higher than to be sat at the right hand of God. And that is what we are about to celebrate in the Feast of the Ascension. So far beyond the idea of our Christian faith being simply be a good person and don't hurt anybody, you know, which is to say, you know, live your life within a fairly narrow sort of moral ethical construct that you don't bring shame upon your family or community. None of that is what this is about. This is about being united to God, who already has demonstrated for us our rightful place, right? It's Psalm 82 says, you are God's. So Psalm 82 verse 5-7 says, they do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods and sons of the Most High. Nevertheless, you will die like men and fall like any one of the princes. Right? And so for many people, that's kind of where we stay. But what God intends for us is to raise us up with him and to seat us with him. And our humanity is already there. So for us, in celebrating the Ascension, we really are getting a very clear goal about what the trajectory of our progress must be. It must be theosis. It must be becoming so united with God, right? And that's not something that we can do on our own. Only the Holy Spirit living within us can make that happen, right? But that is what, for us, transhumanism looks like. Transcending the fallenness, right? I mean, Christ is the first person to transcend, if you will, you know, our broken humanity by assuming it into himself and healing it, right? So as we get into the Feast of the Ascension, listen very carefully to the services with that thought in mind over the next couple of days.
You have a question, Christine?
I do.
Okay, step up.
Just trying to redirect back to the video. I did watch the video, and I actually absolutely loved it. So we understand the Orthodox view of what transcendence is, but how can we use the world's view? Though it's faulty, I thought, or what I saw from the video, is that we can use this to our benefit too, in the Orthodox way, to unite people with Christ. All the use of machines and creating organs, I actually kind of love that, just because we can relieve a lot of suffering, which we created initially. You know, it's our diseases and our wars that are hurting people, so we can actually use that same intelligence to kind of relieve that suffering in a way. I think the fault that I saw in these scientists is that they did try to take God out of the occasion.
Right.
But yet, I still felt like they were still searching for God. There was one of them that said, you know, in the second half of the video, after the 30-minute mark, when they were transducing the entire head of the monkey on an entirely new body, and they said, we can replace the head, the nervous system, the personality moves with it, and then they were questioning whether the soul can translocate also, which we saw that it can. As Orthodox Christians, we know that it can, and I thought that was fascinating, because we can certainly maintain that thought or that quote-unquote soul within a body in our earthly limits, but we can use that to turn it to God, can we not? Because I know we talk about transcendence, and yes, we have the monks and we have the nuns, but not all of us are monks and nuns. Some of us are scientists,
Right.
but we can use that for good, can we not?
I've got a volume in my library. It's a book called Cosmos Vios Theos, and it's actually a collection of essays by eminent scientists in a variety of disciplines who came to positions of faith through the exercise of their various scientific disciplines. So I do absolutely think that as Orthodox, we're not afraid of science, because we look at science as the pursuit of truth. And so long as it is really that, a pursuit of truth, you know, we believe that all truth is God's, and all truth will eventually lead back to Him, no matter how long or circuitous that route may take. So I do certainly agree with you that within certain limits, I think that we absolutely can and must employ whatever technologies we can, you know, to alleviate suffering. And you are correct, suffering that we have caused. But having said that, I'm going to put in a semicolon and reference my earlier point about being very careful about what is the underlying philosophical, and I would say theological premise for those sort of scientific endeavors. If the philosophical premise is one of logical positivism, right? So in other words, the idea of designer babies, or the idea of, because again, this one gal said the body is an extension of fashion, and she waxed eloquent in this film about, you know, basically, you know, we can engineer it to look like this, and it wasn't even like it was completely non-human. It was like, you know, you could shimmer and you could have different materials, and this kind of weird sort of thing that she said. So I do absolutely believe that we must, first of all, the days are gone. We can't hide from society. I'm old enough, believe me, that I wish that I could. Father Allen is even older, although he looks younger, but he's really older than me. And I think that Father Allen employs technology to keep himself looking young like that. We won't get into that. So we can't hide from society around us. But I would say that we need to keep foremost in our mind what is our center of reference. And our center of reference as a human person is the God-man Jesus Christ. Now, stemming from that, there are a lot of other things that we can say. You know, the church has always had a very, very clearly defined understanding of the sacredness of life, right? Because we are a church that stands for the principle of life. So when we talk about protecting, for instance, the life that is in the womb of a mother, we do so from the standpoint of calling the Theotokos iplati teraton uranon, more spacious than the heavens, because she, as a 13-year-old virgin maiden, gave her flesh to God so that the Christ could be born and could wear our humanity, right? And so, you know, we understand then that the first Pentecost that occurred within the womb of the Virgin Mary. So one of the things that I found and continually find to be very refreshing about Orthodox theology is that it is intellectually honest, and it is internally consistent. And it was that last thing that really drove me out of the Protestant world many years ago, was the internal inconsistencies. You know, the idea that, well, we just believe this because we do. I've yet to encounter that kind of an answer within Orthodoxy. So with that as a caveat, I do think that we need to do what we can, certainly, to be a part of this conversation. We can't run from it. I'm old enough, I can run from it. You know, I'll just go hide and, I don't know, do what old guys do, I guess. You know, but your generation really must be a part of this, so that hopefully we can point this in a more productive space. Then, you know, I'm old enough that when I watch movies like this, chill kind of goes down my back. It's like, ooh. I remember the days without cell phones too. So.
We have another question, Father.
Father,
yes.
Regarding what you just said, and the miracles ascribed to the elders, it seems like the more that we get embedded in this culture, and the more that we kind of pursue this, or it's not that we're pursuing it, but it's just a part of us, this rational mind and mechanistic way of thinking, positivistic way of thinking. It seems like that's far away from, you know, the simple mind of the elders, which is just, they don't have like a strategic way of thinking about the world. So do you think that, you know, the more and more we are embedded in society, and the more and more we are a part of the world and where it's headed, that there's going to be less and less grace in that way? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. That's probably not true, but
I mean, it's a good question. We are a highly contextualized people. There's an old country saying, it says, "Never wrestle a pig, because you'll both get dirty and the pig likes it." Right? So when we're in the world, we have to be very careful about how much of it we are partaking of. Right. So again, on the natural plane, the lunacy of me going to the Gulf of Mexico and pouring in a vial of holy water and praying for God to seal that breach. Right. I'm an idiot, but I happen to believe that God's big enough to do it. Right. I mean, I have seen God move in my life and in the life of others enough to know that there's nothing beyond him. We've had a couple fairly miraculous, I mean, really, truly miraculous cures of cancer here in this cathedral lately. And people say, "Oh, Father, we got cancer." And I always say, well, God's bigger than cancer. You know, I went to pray with a guy one time, a little Greek fella, and the funny thing is, he really didn't like me. You know, I was just a priest. You know, I don't know. I went to the hospital. I didn't get a Christmas card from him that year. You know, but he had really bad kidney stones. These huge kidney stones. And they were so bad that he couldn't, you know, they couldn't like do like the laser thing, again, technology, where like the laser thing, and they kind of break him up and then he can pass them. They were going to have to go into his bile ducts, I guess, in his kidney, and fish them out. And this guy was scared to death because he had that done a few years before, and there was a mix up with the anesthesiologist, and he almost died on the table. So I go to the hospital, and we're going to pray with him. And just a very ordinary visit, nothing super amazing happened, you know, but just prayed with him, and prayed that God would take care of him. And so I go home. It's a couple hours later, and a fellow calls me up and says, "Father," I said, "How?" I said, "What's going on? He's in the hospital?" "No, I'm at home." So, "What do you mean you're home?" "Well, funny thing. As soon as you got done, as you were praying with me, I had to go to the bathroom really bad. And so I needed you to go so I could go to the bathroom." So I did. I went to the bathroom, a little jug, and so I put it where it was, you know, and I didn't think it's laying in bed. And the nurse comes in and says, "What's this?" And he goes, "What's what?" And she said, "All your stones are in this little thing here." And he goes, "What?" And she said, "You had to have felt passing these things the size of marbles." And he said, "I didn't feel a thing." So don't limit God. It's a challenging person in your life that you're quarreling with, that you think he'll never change. Don't limit God. You know, something in your own life, my own life, that I'm struggling with, that I can't seem to get the mastery over. Don't limit God. He's much bigger than we think he is. So yeah, I think that grace my own personal view is that I think that grace will be poured out in superabundance on those who want grace in their lives in our day and age.
Father, that's truly transhumanism.
Yes, it is.
We're going to go ahead and bring this to a close here.
All right.
Thank you so much for your being here with us tonight.
Hopefully it made some kind of sense. And you owe me food, Father.
I do owe you food.
You owe me food.
Let's meet halfway between here and there and go have barbecue and beer.
I would love that. You name the day and time. I'm there.
All right, all right.
All right. All right. All you guys, I love you. I pray you're doing well. God bless you. And look forward to seeing you at some point face to face.
Yes. God bless you too. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. All righty. Bye-bye.